Hi, Tracy. Tracy Markle is a family therapist and nationally renowned digital media addiction treatment expert. She's the founder and co-director of Digital Media Treatment and Education Center and its affiliate program, which is called Collegiate Coaching Services, which helps support and guide individuals and families impacted by technology use. So thank you, Tracy, for speaking with me.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. So my first question is, how does early access to the internet and digital media apps affect children and adolescents?
Wow, that's a great question, and one that I'm often asked about, especially for parents who have younger children, and they're trying really hard to prepare their child and themselves for the inevitable laptop or Chromebook at school, and also a smartphone. So one area that I see that I think is really worth mentioning is early and frequent access may inhibit their social communication, their overall development, and their physical health. So, what we see with less movement, if children are in front of screens more often, we see a higher probability of obesity and also of mental health issues. And I want to note there is a really important longitudinal study going on right now called the ABCD study, and it stands for Adolescent Behavior Cognitive Development. It's funded by the National Institute of Health. We've never had anything like this ever happen before in this country, and they started in 2015. They've collected a lot of data, and now we're seeing the evidence come out that we've been really curious about all along is, does it have a direct relationship to kids' mental health issues? And it absolutely does. So a couple key areas that I see in practice, and this research study is backing up, is we're seeing more issues around the development of behavioral disorders like oppositional, defiant type of behaviors, conduct behaviors. And one that is really interesting to me because we see a good number of young people with OCD or obsessive compulsive like tendencies in the center or a full diagnosis is that they're connecting the compulsive viewing of content, which is created by the algorithms and
Mhm.
advertisements found in apps like YouTube, paired with fast-paced, competitive, highly rewarding video gameplay. And what they're seeing is these kids are developing a compulsive and obsessive nature. And if
Mhm.
that isn't intervened on and boundaries are not set and interventions are not put in place, they're reporting that they can develop into a diagnosis of OCD. Now, I will note that they're reporting that 4 hours or more per day is the tipping point of engaging in these kind of behaviors. I know for me, I'm like 4 hours, that's a lot, but I understand. I see even 1 or 2 hours a day of playing video games in YouTube as impactful for this young population. But I understand 4+ hours a day and the development of some of these behavioral and mental health disorders makes a lot of sense to me.
Mhm. So, yeah, so speaking of use, so you've touched a little bit on maybe a length of time that might, tip into overuse.
Yeah.
How do you define technology overuse? And at what point does overuse tip into addiction, which sounds a little more scary to parents?
It is really scary. And I know for us, we call it digital media overuse. That's kind of a phrase we often use because it captures all the immersive applications that kids are drawn to, like video gameplay and streaming videos in YouTube. And we see it as a spectrum. We see healthy use on one end, which definitely still exists for people. But the majority of us exist in the overuse category. And a small percentage actually meet criteria for addiction. So for kids and even adolescents, we look at it more through the lens of it's an impulse control issue versus an addiction. If it's left unchecked and the child continues through middle school and high school, then we start to see it borderline on, are they developing an addiction to this? And so, how we diagnose an addiction is we look at three really main areas to help us identify that for people who are more age appropriate, older adolescents, young adults, and adults alike. And so we look at if they have impaired control. Is this something that they can't control anymore on their own? And we know children just plainly don't have the cognitive control that we seek when we allow them to have their own device or play video games. So again, I want to stress kids we don't diagnose addictions in that age group. Do they give priority to the game or the application? And does it take precedent over their life interests and daily responsibilities, despite the adverse consequences? So these are a few of the areas we'll look at to explore how detrimental is this behavior to them. And I have to tell you, every kid I see in my office, every child, middle school, high school child, often I can tick all these boxes off. And what I like to do is then go work with the parents, and we can talk more about that and how to support them to create more of a structure to reduce that impulse control issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. Overuse for sure is widespread. I mean, just anecdotally, as a parent, you see it everywhere. So, but thank you for drawing the distinction between just overuse, maybe surrounding some behavioral issues, it sounds like, versus like addiction, which would be diagnosable. So thanks. And so speaking of overuse a little bit further, I've definitely seen data just in my own travels about its effect on academics, specifically, which I know a lot of parents care about. And obviously schools very much care about academics. So maybe you can touch on that a little bit. I know you work with, young adults as well as teens and adolescents. So maybe we can, encompass teens and college or one or the other separately, however you want to answer it.
Yeah, of course. Well, so for children, you're absolutely right. I see issues there academically because more and more schools are requiring some level of technology use within the school environment. And also the kids are accessing smartphones at a younger and younger age. The parents are allowing them to have them even as young as third grade, fourth grade, I'm sure even younger. And so schools are really struggling to figure out how to help moderate, manage that. And I know many have really good rules in place and structure in place, which is important. However, the middle school age group is a high risk time for kids. It's when we first start to see little evidence of maybe mental health issues emerging, peer related conflict, and academic challenges. And that's when many schools require for the first time a one-to-one Chromebook or laptop, so to speak, where they have it at all times and they take it home with them. And what we see is kids in general, and it just comes down to brain science, lack the cognitive control to say, no, I need to do my math assignment now. I can't play the video game, which exists on the same computer. They don't have the ability to inhibit that. And it's really, in many respects, unfair to kids in their brain development to expect that they have access to devices at all times. And the area that I also see problematic is parents come in at a loss. They're like, I didn't want my child to get a Chromebook in middle school. Yeah. We limit it at home. How do we do this? And so there's a lot of advocacy that parents have to do with the school administration to try to figure out how to help their child who has high risk diagnoses like ADHD, which is our number one risk factor for overuse. And we know there's a large amount of kids with that diagnosis, more and more every day. And whether that's right or not, I don't know, but we have a lot of kids who struggle. So, the isolation, not engaging face-to-face with peers as much, but also teachers. A lot of these kids rely on that relationship to feel safe and secure in that environment. And if our emotional brain is safe and secure and calm, we're going to be much better learners and we're going to be more motivated to learn. But if we're behind the screen most of the time, and even in the classroom and not engaging as much in that relationship, kids are losing out. And I think that's also partly due to what we're seeing with the mental health crisis.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about distraction, which,
Huh?
I mean, think of being an adult. It's hard enough to focus on your
Yeah.
work when you can be checking your text or your email, or there's just so many distractions everywhere. And as you described, like without having a fully formed brain, I can't imagine any child or teen or even young adult being able to manage this effectively. As you said, and I've heard other experts use the same word, it's really unfair to these young people. So, okay, so you touched on ADHD and OCD and some other neurodivergent topics. So, maybe we can push on that a little bit more. How does technology affect kids that are not neurodivergent?
Great question. And they are the kids with diagnoses under the neurodevelopmental umbrella, the neurodivergent kids, are at exceptionally high risk for overuse. And it's for many reasons. And I'll mention a couple. Kids with ADHD, like I mentioned, are a number one high risk group. They have what we refer to as a novelty seeking brain. They seek stimulation, which in turn releases the all important neurotransmitter dopamine in their brain, which I like to refer to as the give me more neurotransmitter. Once I have that reward, boy, I want more of that. And by nature, their brain releases less dopamine than somebody who's neurotypical. So it makes a lot of sense that they crave this stimulation. And if they're the kiddos that if you ask them to do a mundane task on their computer and they can also play a video game, their brain is just going to take them right to where the stimulation is.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have kids with autism spectrum disorder who are struggle in day-to-day world as far as understanding the nuances of communication, verbal communication, emotions, and just in general social relationships. And so going online is a much more safe environment and controllable environment. They often feel out of control in their day-to-day life when it comes to the many nuances of human interaction, but they can control their interaction online through video game play. They'll still interact with other people, but they don't have to see them. They don't have to communicate about emotions face to face. And if they don't like what's going on, they can just turn it off and walk away. And that's, some level of that. I recommend no more than like 45 minutes a day of video game play. We actually see some benefits if it's 45 minutes or less. But I will note, most of these games are developed to be played for much longer. So I caution parents about that. Research that's out. So for these kids who are immersed playing video games, they're getting a lot of enjoyment out of it. Their parents will often say, I hear them laughing and they're excited and they're talking to other kids. Why would I take that away from them? And I'm like, I know. And the hard part is they're less and less engaged in real life. And they're not having the opportunity to build their skills in person, which is incredibly important for them. And the more they become isolated over time, even kids and teens and young adults with ASD, they feel feelings, and a lot of people have a misconception about that of how deeply do they feel, and they start feeling lonely. They also seek relationship with others, and they eventually start to feel that, and depression and anxiety can start creeping in for them as well.
Interesting. So my next question would be, we do know, I mean, the current research shows that technology can't cause these disorders, which you've touched on earlier, ADHD, autism, because they're neurological disorders. But you touched on earlier that it can cause symptoms of these disorders. Is that right? And how does that work?
Yeah, it's really interesting, this part of the field, because it's emerging science. And I know many of my colleagues for years have said too much screen time as an infant can cause autism. And the researchers say, we can't find evidence of that.
Yeah.
And so to your point, what we see and where I sit mostly with this issue is too much screen time as an infant and a toddler can create ASD-like behaviors, autism-like behaviors. So for example, part of how we learn to interact with other humans and learn what's appropriate and what's not is through eye-to-eye contact as an infant with the primary caretakers. And we have mirror neurons activated in our brain during those moments. So if a parent smiles, the child learns to smile, and so on and so forth. What we're finding is screen time doesn't allow for that to occur. And so kids look like they have blunted affects, they're flat, they're not responding to cues, when in all actuality, the screen has inhibited that part of their development. But they quickly get it back once screens are removed. So Patricia Greenfield, who's actually out of UCLA, she's somebody I refer to quite frequently. I really like her research. She coined the term situational ADHD. And I use that frequently in my work with my clients because they complain about ADHD-like symptoms, yet their screen time has been high for a good amount of time. And so what I like to do is see if they're willing to go through a detox or moderated detox period with my help, which takes a lot of sophistication. I will note detoxes are a scary thing to do if you don't do them correctly. So we want to make sure professionals are involved, especially being mental health professionals. And what we see is their symptoms begin to subside or greatly diminish. And it's profound to see that happen. And so I caution parents when they're rushing out the door to the psychiatrist to put their child on a stimulant med for ADHD, let's try to take a more pragmatic, slow approach and see if we can change things on this end. And then sometimes kids truly have ADHD, but the fast-paced video game play and the nature of YouTube and some of the other streaming sites can make their symptoms much worse than they really are.
So you mentioned situational ADHD is the term. I've also heard the term digital autism. Is that the first part of what you were talking about as well? So it works in a similar way?
Absolutely. That's how I would refer to it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And if it's not a neurological disorder, and if it's a situation where the technology is, exacerbating it, those are the cases where the symptoms can be reversible, right? Where when it's an actual neurological diagnosis, that is a separate
issue.
A separate
issue completely. And it can make the symptoms of that disorder worse. Absolutely. Yeah. They can still have autism or ADHD, but it can make it worse if they're on screens too much.
Okay, that makes sense. So my last question would be, I know this is a very complicated issue and a very individual issue, but if you had to say, give your main tips that you would give to parents to help their families manage tech use, what would be those main tips?
My big tips. Okay. So I first start by saying delay it as long as you can. Introduction of their own mobile device, their own laptop if possible. Use a PC within your home where you have password and parental controls and allow use on that with your oversight. Just by you walking behind them periodically can inhibit where they go on the internet rather than having it in their bedroom. That's my next tip. Not allowing screens in the bedroom whatsoever. And when they get into high school, depending on your child, you might start allowing some of that to prepare for college because they will have them everywhere at college. But I tell parents we have to take a very individualized approach to when it's right for your child to have screen time and have their own device. And a number of factors come into play, such as personality type. Are they shy and introverted versus extroverted? Do they struggle more with emotional regulation, or are they very grounded and just love their sport or their activities? So we look at the whole picture when it comes to the child. And then the third thing I'll say that I think is extremely important, if you're going to introduce a device into your child's life, don't do it as a reward or a gift. Do it when they're ready and responsible. So let
Yeah.
them know in advance, here's what I need to see from you before I know you're ready to have a device and be responsible enough to use it. And in my mind, it's no different than preparing for a driver's license.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pitfalls and, um, so to speak, accidents that can happen when you're not prepared for a smart device or your own device on your own. And so creating that family agreement ahead of time. What do you expect of your child? What are they allowed to do and not do? And having relevant consequences. Consequences are so important because they help us change our behavior. If there are no consequences, children have a hard time learning, and we don't want them to have natural consequences when it comes to what can happen on online platforms, which is a lot of really scary stuff like
Mhm.
cyberbullying and some of the other issues we're experiencing today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Those were really, I think, manageable tips that anybody can implement. So thank you
Yeah,
so much.
sure.
I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your work in this category. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's my pleasure. And thanks to you as well.
Good talking with you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.